Rooftop bars glowing above the skyline, night markets lit with rows of neon signs, tuk-tuks idling at intersections, waiting to weave through traffic, temples framed perfectly at sunset, their gold surfaces catching the last light of the day. It's a city presented as energetic, affordable, and endlessly exciting. For many visitors, that image feels accurate. Bangkok is often the first stop in Thailand, and it leaves a strong impression. The food is everywhere. The streets never seem to sleep. There's always something happening, no matter the hour. Even a short stay can feel overwhelming in the best possible way. But that version of Bangkok exists mostly at the surface. Once you spend more time here or step just a few streets away from the main tourist corridors, the atmosphere begins to shift. The crowds thin out, the sounds change, the city feels less like a constant celebration and more like a place that's working hard to keep things moving. Make sure to like and subscribe for more Thailand content. In some areas, the energy doesn't disappear. It just feels more controlled. The same music loops night after night. The same signs glow in the same colors. The same conversations repeat themselves, aimed at a steady flow of visitors who may only be here for a few days. To someone arriving for the first time, it all blends together naturally. To someone who stays longer, it starts to feel intentional. Bangkok is often described as chaotic, but much of what tourists experience is carefully organized. Certain streets are built to absorb crowds. Certain neighborhoods are shaped around short-term stays. Everything is designed to be convenient, accessible, and immediately rewarding. That design works. It keeps people moving, it keeps money flowing, but it also creates a divide between the Bangkok that's shown and the Bangkok that's lived in. The city you see in travel videos is only a small portion of what actually exists. Beyond the nightlife districts and shopping zones are neighborhoods that rarely appear online, places where people wake up early, commute long distances, and return home long after the tourist areas have quieted down. Those two versions of the city overlap, but they don't always connect. What makes this harder to notice is how well Bangkok performs its role as a destination. The service is polished, the prices feel reasonable, the experiences are packaged to feel spontaneous even when they're not. Most visitors never question it. There's no reason to. Everything works as expected, but over time, that polished version of Bangkok starts to feel less like a reflection of the city and more like a product built around it. A version that highlights comfort and excitement while keeping certain realities just out of view. This isn't about saying Bangkok is fake. It's about recognizing that what most people see is only one layer, and it's from that layer, the one designed almost entirely for tourism, that many of the city's deeper problems begin. Bangkok has areas that feel less like neighborhoods and more like systems. Streets designed to handle a constant flow of short-term visitors where almost every storefront, sign, and service exists for people who won't be there very long. In these districts, the pattern becomes noticeable once you slow down. The menus are printed in multiple languages. The music stays the same from one bar to the next. Massage shops line the street, each offering nearly identical services at nearly identical prices. The details change, but the structure doesn't. During peak season, these areas are full. Sidewalks become crowded, traffic slows. Businesses compete for attention with lights, music, and signage that never fully turns off. From the outside, it looks like success, but timing matters here. Come back late in the morning before the crowds arrive or walk through during a slower week, and the atmosphere shifts. Many shutters are still down. Staff sit quietly inside empty shops, waiting. The street feels paused, like it hasn't fully woken up yet. This rhythm repeats daily. Busy at night, quiet by day. Alive when tourists are present, empty when they aren't. For the people working in these areas, that cycle defines everything. Income depends on foot traffic, tips, and commissions. A good night can make up for several slow ones. A bad week can erase an entire month's progress. Stability is rare. Businesses open quickly and disappear just as fast. A bar closes, another opens in the same space with a new name and a slightly different theme. To visitors, it feels like variety. To locals, it feels temporary. Many workers move from place to place, following demand rather than building careers. There's little room for growth, and even less protection when things slow down. What's striking is how disconnected these districts can feel from the rest of the city. Just a few blocks away, Bangkok functions normally. Families shop at local markets, office workers eat lunch on their break. Life continues without any reference to nightlife or tourism. But inside the tourist zones, everything revolves around consumption and convenience. The goal isn't to reflect Bangkok as it is, it's to meet expectations, quickly and efficiently. Over time, these areas stop feeling like parts of a city and start feeling like extensions of an industry. That separation makes them vulnerable. When tourism is strong, they thrive. When it slows, they empty out almost instantly. Unlike mixed-use neighborhoods, there's no backup plan, no local customer base to rely on, no long-term community to support them. This is why these streets can feel so strange during quiet periods. The infrastructure is still there. The lights, the signs, the seating, but the purpose is missing. They weren't built to exist on their own. For visitors, these neighborhoods are often the most memorable parts of Bangkok. They're convenient, exciting, and easy to navigate, but they also represent one of the city's biggest risks. A version of Bangkok that depends almost entirely on people passing through and starts to fade the moment they don't. Thailand is known around the world for its hospitality. In Bangkok, that reputation is part of the city's identity. Visitors are often struck by how friendly, patient, and accommodating service workers appear, even in the busiest and most demanding environments. Smiles are expected, politeness is constant, frustration rarely shows. But maintaining that image comes with a cost that most travelers never see. In tourist-heavy areas, many workers spend long hours on their feet, often under bright lights and loud music. Shifts can stretch late into the night, especially in neighborhoods that never really sleep. For some, this is daily routine, not a short-term inconvenience. Pay structures in these areas are rarely straightforward. Base wages are often low, with income depending heavily on tips, commissions, or daily performance. A good night can feel rewarding. A slow one can feel discouraging. There's very little predictability. That uncertainty creates pressure, not just to work harder, but to be more accommodating than necessary. In many cases, workers are expected to tolerate behavior that would be unacceptable elsewhere. Loudness, entitlement, impatience, and disrespect are often brushed off as part of the job. Complaints are rare, not because problems don't exist, but because confronting them can risk income. The expectation isn't written down anywhere, it's simply understood. Over time, this dynamic shapes interactions. Friendliness becomes part of the transaction. Attention is given not just as service, but as a way to ensure stability in an unstable system. Most visitors never notice this distinction. From their perspective, the experience feels effortless. They're welcomed, served, and moved along smoothly. What they don't see is how exhausting that performance can be when it has no clear end. There's also a quiet imbalance in how responsibility is shared. When something goes wrong, it's often the frontline workers who absorb the impact. They apologize, adjust, and compensate. Even when the problem is out of their control, management remains invisible. Systems remain unchanged. For workers who rely on tourism, leaving these jobs isn't always easy. Alternatives may pay less or require longer commutes. Some stay because it's familiar, others because it's flexible, many because there simply aren't better options nearby. The emotional toll of this work builds slowly. Burnout doesn't arrive suddenly. It shows up as detachment, fatigue, and the quiet acceptance that this is just how things are. Yet despite all of this, the city's tourism image remains intact. Visitors leave with positive impressions. Reviews stay high. The system continues to function. That's what makes the issue difficult to address. From the outside, nothing appears broken, but behind the smiles and smooth interactions is a workforce constantly adjusting to meet expectations that never really change. Expectations shaped not by local needs, but by global demand. Bangkok's hospitality is real, but it's also heavily relied upon. And in a city where tourism never truly stops, the pressure to always be welcoming becomes one of the least visible and most overlooked costs of the industry. Bangkok is a city that adapts quickly. It always has. Over the years, entire neighborhoods have shifted in response to tourism. Streets that once served local communities gradually transform into places designed for short stays, quick spending, and easy recognition. The change usually starts small. A cafe replaces a family-run shop. A guest house opens where an apartment once stood. Menus switch languages. Prices adjust. The area becomes more convenient for outsiders and a little less familiar for the people who live there. As tourism grows, the transformation accelerates. Landlords realize they can earn more from short-term rentals than long-term tenants. Apartments turn into serviced units. Hotels rise where homes once stood. Rents increase, often faster than wages. For residents, the cost of staying put becomes harder to justify. Some move farther away from the city center. Others leave entirely. What remains is a neighborhood that still looks like Bangkok, but no longer functions like one. Local businesses feel the shift almost immediately. Shops that catered to daily needs struggle to compete with souvenir stores and international chains. Traditional services disappear, replaced by experiences designed to photograph well and move people through quickly. To visitors, this version of the city feels accessible. Everything is familiar enough to navigate without effort. The food matches expectations. The signs are easy to read. The experience feels safe, but convenience comes at a price. As neighborhoods reshape themselves around tourism, the sense of community thins. Streets become quieter during the day and louder at night. Long-term relationships between shop owners, neighbors, and customers fade as turnover increases. The city becomes more segmented. Certain areas exist almost entirely for visitors. Others become purely residential, pushed farther out by rising costs. What's lost in the process isn't always visible. It's not just buildings or businesses, it's routine, memory, belonging. Bangkok still functions, but differently. The pace of change, they also makes it difficult to reverse. Once an area becomes known as a tourist district, it's hard to shift its identity. Investments follow expectations. New developments reinforce the same patterns. Even when tourism slows, the infrastructure remains. Hotels stand half empty. Shops struggle to adapt. Former residents don't always return. This creates a city that feels increasingly optimized for short-term presence rather than long-term life. For visitors, these changes often go unnoticed. A neighborhood that feels lively and well-maintained doesn't raise questions. Few stop to consider what existed before or who might have been displaced in the process. The transformation is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. But over time, the cumulative effect becomes harder to ignore. Bangkok starts to feel less like a city shaped by its people and more like one shaped by demand. That doesn't mean the city loses its identity entirely. Bangkok remains resilient, creative, and deeply rooted in its culture. But the balance shifts. As more of the city adjusts to meet visitor expectations, fewer spaces are left untouched. And the gap between the Bangkok that's visited and the Bangkok that's lived in grows wider. This is one of the darker realities of tourism in the city. Not because change is bad, but because so much of it happens without conversation, and without the people most affected having much choice. Bangkok is built to handle crowds, but the city's dependence on tourism becomes most visible when those crowds disappear. During peak seasons, the streets pulse with energy. Night markets hum, tuk-tuks buzz, bars and cafes overflow, and hotel lobbies are full of laughter and conversation. In those moments, it's easy to forget that much of this city is designed to operate almost entirely on visitor activity. But when tourism slows, the patterns shift quickly, often in ways that feel sudden and striking. Streets that were crowded just days before become quiet. Shops that seemed permanently open shutter their doors. Neon signs that blinked endlessly dim or turn off entirely. The contrast between peak and slow seasons can be almost cinematic, leaving entire blocks feeling abandoned overnight. Areas built for tourists are especially vulnerable. Because most businesses rely heavily on short-term visitors, there isn't a stable local customer base to fill the gap. Cafes that thrived on groups of travelers suddenly face empty tables. Massage parlors see far fewer appointments. Shops that sold souvenirs, clothes, and trinkets find little demand from locals. The infrastructure remains, but the people to sustain it do not. Workers feel the impact immediately. Many staff earn most of their income from tips or commissions, which drop dramatically when visitors vanish. Shifts are cut. Some businesses close temporarily while others never reopen. The slowdown also reveals the fragility of the city's carefully curated experiences. Rooftop bars that seemed perpetually busy become quiet, their music barely audible. Street performers find fewer spectators. Long queues disappear, replaced by empty sidewalks. It's a subtle reminder that much of the city's vibrancy is contingent on constant demand, not organic growth. Even when tourism rebounds, the recovery is uneven. Some areas regain their former energy while others remain quiet, permanently altered by the pause. Businesses that shuttered may not return, or they reopen with new owners, new themes, and new faces. The memories of what was once there linger only in photographs or in the minds of those who remember. This cycle, surge, decline, partial recovery, creates a city that is in perpetual motion, yet also in a constant state of flux. Bangkok doesn't collapse when tourism slows, but its vulnerabilities become undeniable. Visitors may notice empty streets or quieter markets, but they rarely see the full impact on the workers, neighborhoods, and communities that rely on consistent traffic to survive. And while some may describe this as resilience, it also highlights one of Bangkok's darker realities. The city's prosperity is intimately tied to external demand. When that demand wanes, the consequences are immediate and far-reaching, affecting not just businesses but entire neighborhoods, livelihoods, and even the character of the city itself. Bangkok continues to function, but the cracks in the system are easier to see. The vibrancy that tourists take for granted exists because of constant motion. And that motion is fragile. Bangkok isn't losing its visitors, far from it. Every year, travelers continue to arrive, filling the streets, temples, and markets with energy that the city has learned to harness. Yet beneath the surface, there is a quiet tension, a sense that the city is balancing between two very different futures. On one side is the Bangkok that caters almost entirely to tourists. This is the city that dominates travel guides, Instagram feeds, and hotel brochures. Streets are polished, menus are translated into multiple languages, and the experiences are curated for convenience and comfort. It's easy to navigate, visually appealing, and designed to impress. For short-term visitors, it is almost flawless. But the other side is less visible. It is the Bangkok shaped by long-term residents, local communities, and everyday life that exists beyond the reach of tour groups. This version of the city moves at a different pace. Streets are quieter, conversations are in Thai rather than English, and life is less packaged. Neighborhoods retain character and history, but are increasingly pushed to the margins as tourism continues to expand. The tension between these two realities is subtle. It is seen in empty storefronts after a tourist season ends. It is felt in neighborhoods where rents rise faster than wages, forcing families to move further away from the city center. It is heard in the quiet exhaustion of workers who must maintain constant hospitality even when demand fluctuates. Bangkok faces a choice, though it may not be a conscious one. It can continue to expand the areas designed almost entirely for visitors, investing in hotels, restaurants, and attractions that exist only when tourists are present. This path promises short-term prosperity and visual appeal, but risks widening the gap between the city that visitors see and the city that residents inhabit. The alternative is less glamorous but potentially more sustainable. A Bangkok that balances tourism with spaces that support locals, communities, and long-term life. This version of the city might feel less polished, less immediately convenient, but it would allow neighborhoods to thrive even when visitor numbers dip. It would preserve history, culture, and the human rhythms that make the city more than a destination. Neither path is simple. Tourism drives income, employment, and development. It has transformed Bangkok into a global city. Yet, unchecked, it also creates fragility, where entire streets and livelihoods depend on people who may leave at any moment. Bangkok will continue to attract travelers. Its temples, markets, and streets are too unique, too dynamic, and too alive for that to change. But for those who spend time observing, the city's dual nature is impossible to ignore. The darker side of tourism isn't scandal or crime. It isn't about dramatic headlines. It is about quiet trade-offs, compromises between convenience and authenticity, between short-term gains and long-term resilience. And once you see them, it becomes hard to look at Bangkok the same way. The city is vibrant and thriving, but it is also a place in transition, caught between the needs of visitors and the realities of those who call it home. Its future will depend on how well it can balance those two worlds, and whether it can remain a city for both people and tourists alike.